bringing you up to date on all the action from a busy weekend of women's soccer. This is USL Super League Game Week on SiriusXM FC.
Welcome back into Game Week alongside former All-SEC standout Marion Crowder. I'm Anna Witte. This week, we are bringing back the Super 5 Showdown game and then setting up the 4 matches this week in Match Day 12. We are also joined by Spokane's head coach Joe Johnson later in the show. So we've got jam-packed show for us today. Let's kind of start with Tampa Bay, Marion, jump into it this week because it's a team we haven't talked too much about this season, but they've really been kind of on the decline the last few weeks. They beat DC 3-0. They went into a postponed game against Fort Lauderdale, had a month off, and then it's back-to-back losses in week 11 for Tampa Bay on the road. They really have probably, to me, the luckiest schedule because they go on the road, they come home, there's consistency there. Week 11 is probably the hardest part of their schedule. But for how experienced this team is, Marion, for how many players they have on the team that have played at the professional level, is that ever an excuse at this point in the season to have these 2 losses?
I think you have to, well, first of all, they pretty much were off of all of October for some postponements. Right. And that was kind of the red flag I have in my mind is obviously you have time to rest and recover, but you're not getting the consistent match reps that all of the other teams are getting. And that's a very different mentality to kind of be in training mode. And when you have the consistent game in, game out type of weeks, you really know how to plan your schedule. I'm not saying it's an excuse by any means, just a factor. Right. Another thing that for me is actually a factor and maybe where you and I have differing opinions on is just that perhaps like I'm looking at a team like Spokane who they knew coming down the stretch, they were going to have most of their, if not the last, 6 were all going to be on the road. Right. And so you kind of have that mental switch where you're like, all right, I know this is coming. I know this is coming. I know what to expect. But going home, away, yeah, it's consistent, but it really doesn't allow for you to get into a rhythm, I would argue, as a player, right? You're always kind of thinking about, all right, I got to pack for the next road trip. Okay, now I'm coming home. I've got friends and family in town. You're in, this match day -1, match day +1 type of mentality, but you do operate differently on the road versus operating at home. And so there are some things to consider in terms of what Tampa Bay is dealing with. Is it an excuse? Absolutely not. You and I have talked about it. This is a very experienced squad from the starting 11 that they're putting out to the players that they're bringing off of the bench. And so you would expect that there wouldn't be this need of an adjustment, perhaps like we would be talking about for a young team like Lexington, right? And Lexington is seemingly figuring it out a lot sooner than Tampa Bay has because it does seem like Tampa Bay is on a bit of a regression. I think what we saw in their match, their last match was just too many giveaways, right? It was too easy for Brooklyn to dispossess them. The building out of the back wasn't like we normally see it for players of the caliber they have, like a Kristen Edmonds.
Right. And really, it was players like Kristen Edmonds, the entire back line that made those mistakes that typically don't. They're the players that everyone around is looking up to have the advice on the experience at this level. But it's not just the Brooklyn game, it's the Spokane game. Into Tampa Bay's favor, they traveled to Brooklyn on Wednesday, and then they had to hit the road that weekend and play Spokane all the way across the country. That's time change. That's definitely a lag on these players' bodies. That for sure is something that I could see but the adjustment in game wasn't there. The preserving their energy, changing some formation things. We've seen a little bit of it from Tampa Bay where they're not just having Listro in the 6. They're now at times there's a double pivot for Tampa Bay in the midfield. However, when you have that experience, when you have also that experience with your head coach, Denise Schulte-Brown has tons of experience with these players on the Tampa Bay side, and yet they still only have 2 wins heading into match day 12.
Yeah. And I love the point that you bring up because sometimes too, when you are on that, like the double match week, it's really difficult not to take the momentum of whatever happened in the first game
Right.
into the second game, right? Like it's very hard to just make a clean slate of, hey, all right, we lost, that one's behind us, we're turning around in 3 days and we're going to get a positive result. More times than not, you're going to see 2 negatives or 2 positives on a double match week, and exactly what we saw for Tampa Bay. And I have in my notes here, there are some good things that they did. Obviously, Cecile Flo Nielsen's ability to play back to goal, I think she is a very bright spot for this Tampa Bay Sun group. But it comes down to exactly what you're saying. It just didn't feel like the response,
Right.
whether that was the response after their first match or even the response after the goal that they gave up against Spokane, it just wasn't there.
Right. And that was a game where Spokane beat Tampa Bay 1-0. No goals for Tampa Bay against Spokane. And that was the final match at home for Spokane. Rest of week 11, it was Brooklyn beating Tampa Bay to kick off the action last Wednesday. DC Power beat Lexington 2-1. Dallas and Carolina tied 2-2. Brooklyn defeated Fort Lauderdale 3-1. In this chaotic month of Brooklyn, 2 wins is something where they've kind of turned the tide. And I think, Marion, this is a great conversation and a great example of we're early on in a league season. Players' minds and coaches' minds are all over the place. It is chaotic. Yeah. So you never know what you're going to get week to week with any given team.
Yeah, and that's why, we say all these things, right? But I hope everyone understands, like, we are coming at this from a position of grace and understanding that this is all still so new, but you do want to, we're coming down the stretch of the fall season, if that's what we want to call it. You want to put together a really good stretch of games to make yourself feel comfortable. And Brooklyn right now, they had a little bit of a stretch, right? We were kind of questioning some lineup changes from Jess Silva. We're still seeing some lineup changes from her, benching Jess Garziano and Isabel Cox, but Dana Sheriff, 2 goals, 2 games.
If it works, it works.
So I do still have questions on, obviously, there is still a very clear, to me, a very clear question mark in goal between Purcell and Sid Martinez, and the goal was soft. I get it, the eyes and the sun, it's something to be a factor on, but definitely a game that Brooklyn could have come out of that with a clean sheet and didn't have the capability to do so.
I sidelined the Carolina-Brooklyn game last week, 2 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And one of the conversations that we had with Carolina's head coach, Philip Poole, he said, why are we playing the fall games if we aren't here to win? We
Amen.
Want to win. We want to get results, and we feel like we can do it. Carolina's set this standard and really separated themselves from every other team in the league. They are still undefeated at the top of the table. And it seems like every other team is still trying to figure out their way.
Yeah, and a little bit, again, it goes back to what you and I believe it was last week that we spoke about. Think about Carolina. What word comes to your mind? For me, it's stability. Whether that's the starting 11, whether that's the performances from every single player that steps on the field, whether that's a young player making their debut, there seems to be this standard for which every single player has consistently met. And I think that has a lot, we can get into this at a different time, but that has a lot to do with things outside of those 90 minutes, right? And creating the stable environment for the players in the front office, stable training environments, the consistency in those places. And that's showing up in the 90 minutes. But we're also seeing some teams, I argue Lexington, right? We're seeing good things with Lexington, and they have one more goal than a team like Carolina, but they are still sitting in that negative goal differential. That -7 goal differential is the most in the entire league. And so Carolina is this team where things are tending to balance each other out. Maybe the defense doesn't have a great performance, but the offense weighs. We're seeing that Lexington can score consistently, but that offensive stats aren't being carried because of the goal differential, right? So they're still sitting at the last place of the table. So it's kind of the give and take. Those two teams are great examples of kind of just what consistency. We may not be leading in every stat. Obviously, we're leading in the wins column where it matters, but a team like Lexington, who is leading in that goals category, it's not been enough to lift them from the bottom of the table.
Lexington still in that 8th place. Carolina setting the standard at the top. Marion, you and I are about to create teams in this Super 5 showdown where we want to set the standard. We want to be consistent. We played this game early on in the season, and it will be fun to revisit here in the middle of the season, the fall season, because a lot has changed. We've seen a lot of players step in. We've seen some players sign with new clubs. We played a little bit of rock, paper, scissors, shoot to figure out who goes first. So you want to play again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wait.
Well, best of one, right? Or best of two?
But rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Okay.
Correct.
Sure.
Rock, paper, scissors, shoot.
I think we did this exact same.
Scissors,
paper.
I'm going to keep going with the scissors.
Anna goes scissors.
Yes. I'm surprised you haven't made a mental note of this yet. Okay.
Honestly, I can't even remember who I picked. I do remember a few. I do remember a few. But.
Yeah, I'd have to revisit that episode, and feel free to go back and listen and see. I don't think there's any repeats for me on this list because we've seen a lot of players. Either. Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of players step up and shine. So we'd like to hear from the audience too. Who do you think is going to win this round 2 of the Super 5 showdown? My formation is a 2-1-2. Okay. I'm starting with a defender who's been on a team who's seen a lot of ebbs and flows. It hasn't been pretty for the defense to start the season, but as they go on, this player has seemed to gain confidence. She is a center back who scores goals, and she's a young player who is really starting to step into a leadership position for this team. I'm putting Lexington's Sydney Shepherd on my back line.
I knew it. As soon as you hit the inconsistencies a little bit, but continuously going in the right direction, and the fact that she scores goals, I was like, has to be.
Yes, of course. I got to give them their kudos.
Good pick. Okay, so I'll start. I'm going in a 2-1-2 as well. As last time, I do remember this. I have a little bit of Fred Briant in me, where it's like, formation's not that important as long as we have the understanding relationally that we have to have the balance. Okay. So keep that in mind. Okay. But you went with the defender first, so I'll go with my most defensive pick. We'll say that.
Okay.
Wolfbauer, DC Power.
Dang it, Marion. Okay.
But talk about somebody that can play across all 3 lines.
Yeah.
We've obviously seen her start the season at the center back position, moved up into the midfield line with a couple of different changes and a couple of different additions, gets them their first brace, yes, from the penalty spot, but calm, cool, collected under pressure, has the vision, the kind of player you want in a 5-side.
Yeah, that's exactly why I was going to bring in Wolfbauer, because she has been so consistent, especially when it comes to those PK kicks. And she's just a solid, really, like you said, defensive-minded defender. Bummer. And I had 2 center backs, so I think this actually might bode well for me in my draft. Let's go with another defender. I'm going to go with a team who has been middle of the pack to start this season. A team who honestly has the ability to perform better out of their back line. But this is a defender who's going to give me a ton of pace down the in-line. She's going to be able to create services and do the work defensively if need be. So I'm going to go with Dallas's Julia Dorsey on my back line. She's consistent. She's got speed. She's got pace. She's athletic. And that's what you need in a 5-a-side game.
I like that. That's an underrated pick. That might be the most underrated pick.
Really? Why do you think that?
She just doesn't get enough credit. I feel.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I agree with you. I feel like the understanding of the game, the intelligence of and timing of tackles. I feel like she is an underrated player, honestly, that we just don't talk about all that often. Great selection.
And I do think this is because Dallas has been so middle of the pack, right?
Agreed.
They just haven't separated themselves. So the credit to the back line hasn't been there. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and we're talking about this, like, let's just keep reminding everyone that I'm looking at it now, from 3 to 8 teams are separated by 2 points.
Right.
So Dallas right now kind of like living by their draws. That's kind of keeping them in the middle of the pack. If they could just turn 1 or 2 of those draws into wins, we would be talking about them very similarly to Carolina and Brooklyn.
Yeah, so, for sure.
Good pick. Okay. Next one from me, I'm going to go. She's not going to be the 2. Like, I mean, let's be honest. We're not really playing a 2-1-2. We're just kind of going where we see fit, but she would start there statically. Okay. Also a player, perhaps because of the weapons on her team, doesn't get enough credit for the chances that she is able to create, as well as her defensive presence in the middle of the park. I'm going to go Brooklyn's Mackenzie Pluck.
I like this.
set up the goal for Sam Kroger. Now, don't get me wrong, Sam Kroger, there's nothing that I can take away from that absolute missile of a shot from you, but she set it up. She's a player who is not afraid to get down and dirty, make the tackles when needed, but also we have seen her collect the ball in the half turn. And when she runs out of back line, she always makes the right decisions as long as she's got the options in front of her. But when you're playing with Isabel Cox and Mackenzie George, right, and you have all of these dynamic players, sometimes it's hard to get your name called. But don't think that what you're doing, Mackenzie Pluck, is not going unseen, because you're crushing.
Yep. I like that. That's a really good one. In fact, I actually had Mackenzie Pluck as one of my forwards in this five-a-side game, because to your point, like she can get forward, she can score, but has the defensive presence as well. Very experienced player. I really like that Mackenzie Pluck pick.
But we can agree I'm not going 2 center backs. I think we just
No, for sure. For sure. I think that's smart in this five-a-side game. And I also like these players have really stepped up here in the last 5 matches in the start to the fall. Headed into my midfield, you touched on her a little bit. This is a player that I have really been excited about every single time we've talked about her, been able to call a Brooklyn game. She holds down the fort. She's a consistent 6 for me. The 6 gets a lot of spotlight in my eyes and how I see the game, because especially in this Brooklyn system, this player creates a lot and also does the defensive work a lot for Jess Silva's side. Sam Kroger, going to get her flowers on my team. She is just so solid. She doesn't necessarily have the pace, but that's okay in a five-a-side game. She can shoot from distance. She's a proven goal scorer, has a goal on the season, but also has the defensive presence. If Dorsey gets high, she can slide in behind.
Sam also, one thing that goes unnoticed about Sam Kroger is her ability to sit in the correct pockets.
Right.
And I mean that on both sides of the ball. She has a really innate ability to be able to sit behind the initial line of pressure. And that often is what unlocks Brooklyn to be able to go forward. And then I actually think that she reads the game extremely well on the defensive side of the ball, what the players in front of her are doing, what pockets are they forcing the next pass to go into. She always seems to be right there. Of course, I had Sam, so I'm just
building on that. I like it.
For my one, I'm going to go with a team who are on a recent downturn, but in my eyes have absolutely nothing to worry about. And a team that I tease, and I would love to get Tyrone Mears on the show and talk about it, but perhaps for me has the best roster construction from the players they're able to bring off the bench. Their starting 11 is just about putting it consistently together. And this player for me unlocks a lot of what they can do out on the wings. And that's Jasmine Hamid, Fort Lauderdale. I absolutely love what she does. And I think that she is one of the most versatile players in the league. I think that she can play as a winger. She can play as a 10. And if she needed to, she could also play as a second striker in a 2 front with her intelligence and movement off the ball.
I love it. I actually, not to go quickly into my side, but have the latter side of that player in my attack, because Hamid is really good 1v1. And I think we've talked a lot about Fort Lauderdale's attack is probably the most deadly attack in this league right now. Yeah. They've just shown so much versatility as they get forward. So really good pick. All right, I teased her a little too hard. It's probably pretty obvious, but Fort Lauderdale has the pace. They've got 2 players in the wide areas who can get the job done. So for me, I'm going with Fort Lauderdale's Shania Gordon. Experience, pace. She has the ability to create service. She can get in behind. She has, with Kroger playing underneath her, Kroger can play her nice balls in behind. Dorsey can create overlapping runs, and it doesn't leave Gordon kind of wide-eyed and not sure where to go. Gordon is a very smart player in the attack as well. So yeah, I think my first attacking player is going to be Shania Gordon.
We can't have 5-a-side and not have her in this. So
yeah, absolutely not.
I knew it. And I thought, because I felt like it was going to be too obvious of a pick, because she and I, in terms of like how we see the game, very, very similar. So I felt like it was going to be too obvious for me to pick her. So, but if you weren't, I certainly was. So I'm glad that you did. For me, I'm going to go a little outside of my comfort zone. The reason I say outside of my comfort zone is because, like I just said, I'm a Shania Gordon type of player. I see the game that way. I love players who are brave and willing to just go at you. But because I've got Hamid sitting at the 1, right, and I've got Mackenzie Plug right behind her, and even Wolfbauer, who they can all kind of maneuver, I feel like, in this 3-man formation. They can get wide, they can step up, they can drop back if they need to. I need players who can not only be central and be strike oriented, but I also need players who can link those missing pieces together. And for me of late, that is Cecile Flo Nielsen, Tampa Bay Sun. I said it earlier. I think she has been the brightest spot for this Suns side
Yep.
because of her ability to be strong, back to goal, and link the lines behind her.
Dang it, Marion. That was my pick.
Yes. I had to steal one, Anna. I had to steal one.
That's fair. That's fair. And to your credit, she can link. She is good back to goal. And those are the reasons I was looking to have her involved in a five-a-side game. Like, she's not just on her island by herself. And
Yep.
the reason Tampa Bay is getting results is her addition. I think she's really good in this Tampa side. I think she'll be great on your team, Marion. You're going to have to give me 1 second because
Now you got to change. Now you
got to make a change.
Go to the roster. Well, who's on the bench?
Who am I going to add?
Who's in the 18?
I had a player on the bench, but we can't go to. It was another Dallas player, so I can't go two Dallas players.
Can you? No, oh yeah, you can't.
Yeah, I think that was a rule we made last time. All right, you know what? I'm going to go with a player that we've had on this show before. Okay. She is a player who is experienced. Okay. She's got a lot of confidence going forward, but at times you see her shying away, and I think Mary knows exactly who I'm going towards. And she's a player who hasn't completely found her stride, but I know in a five-a-side game, and a game where she can really show her pace, her ability on the ball is really good, her timing and behind is great. I'm going with Jorian Balcom. She will be a great fifth addition to this team, and hopefully these games on my team, she can, start getting that confidence, seeing the ball go in the back of the net, because that's all she needs, Marion, really, at this point in this Super League season. It's just like 1 or 2 goals, and then it's off to the races.
Couldn't agree more. And I feel like some of the youth signings, some of the academy signings that DC has just enlightened us with,
yes,
take some of the pressure off of her. It is a very, and this is, yes, that's why they get paid the big bucks. And I'm not saying anything about, I'm just saying historically, that's why a number 9 gets paid the most, is because it's also the job outside of a goalkeeper that has the most pressure associated to it. It's a burdensome and it's a lonely place to be, because your job is truly to win matches in big moments. And so sometimes when you add certain additions like DC is doing with their academy signings, that pressure is lifted a bit and you can play with a bit more freedom, a bit more confidence. So I think that the academy signings are really going to help Jorian.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on why the signings will help a player like Jorian, bringing in young players with an experienced player?
Yeah, and sometimes it's very interesting. It's almost, if you're familiar with the college game, it's almost like playing with a senior and a freshman, right? Because as a senior, you have already gone and seen so much, right? You understand the game at a much deeper level, at a much higher level. Yep. But sometimes that can actually be harmful to you because you're making the game more complicated than it needs to be. And then you have this breath of fresh air, right? This freshman that is coming onto the pitch and they don't know any better. They don't know any better but to get themselves in good goal scoring positions and just put a head to it, right? Like we saw with Flanagan, who, her debut was just a picturesque dream country. Absolutely perfect. And so you're almost getting this new jolt of energy, this new spark that tells you mentally it doesn't have to be that complicated. And with the player as intelligent as Jorian is, sometimes that can also be your biggest downfall, is not being able to kind of take that step outside of yourself and see, okay, maybe I'm making this too complicated. Maybe I'm not actually reading what the game is telling me, and I am just going through all these different scenarios in my head because I have that knowledge. And so I really just think the jolt of energy, the freshness that some of these academy signings can bring, really not only give her a fresh perspective, but again, if they're proving that they can score goals, that's going to take some attention on the scouting report off of you. And I think that that's something that DC has struggled with a little bit, particularly with Jorian, is if I'm looking at their scout, she's my one, right? She's the one. I am not going to let her receive the ball. I'm not going to let her turn and face. And so now when you've got other threats in different parts of the field, the defense has to give something. And they're either going to continue to mark Jorian and their teammates are going to continue to come up big, or they're going to start to figure out ways to mitigate the risk of her other teammates. And then she's going to have a bit more open and favorable space. So a couple different reasons, actually, why I think the academy signings will help.
It's the pressure off herself, but also the pressure on the opponent to know that Jorian isn't the only player who can score on
100%.
this DC side. It's only a matter of time. And we've already started to see things kind of pop up. Your point, Flanagan having a brace in the match for DC this past week. They've got some really fun young signings. So excited to see them. But before we wrap up the Super 5 showdown, Marion, you got one more player to pick. Who you adding?
And I actually think, and kudos to her, and we've alluded to it, but she's going to be, I think, the only, I'm going to have to go back and watch it, but I think she's going to be the only one that makes the list twice.
Okay.
Okay? That's a big deal. And it's because, again, we're all about consistency, especially consistency in front of goal. Anna, what did we say last week? We're dying to see some consistency in front of goal, right? The defenders, they can't do everything. Attackers, we got to have you guys taking some better shots on goal. We got to have you making some better decisions in front of goal. Who has continuously made the best decisions in front of goal, despite results, despite everything? Maddie Parsons, Lexington. Has to be her. I think she is extremely efficient with the chances that she creates. Yes, she's had some additions that have opened up a few more opportunities from her. But even when Lexington was just looking like they needed to go get an entirely new team, she was the bright spot that was consistently getting them points on the board. So she's going to be on it for round 2.
I love that pick. In fact, if I didn't add Sydney Shepherd to my roster, I would have picked Parsons because it was also, she was a part of that rotation change. She moved a little bit higher up the field.
Yep.
Mary Kate McGuire came in a little bit deeper into the midfield, and that's when things opened for Lexington. You also have to attribute Claire Winter being added to the roster, Amanda Allen getting consistent more minutes in the starting 11. But to your point, I think Parsons is going to add a lot of depth to your 5-a-side team. I really like that pick.
Clinical finishers in front of goal. That's what I'm going with.
That's what you need as a 9.
Yeah.
That's all you need. So everyone watching, listening to the show, please comment. Let us know who you think wins this round of the Super 5 showdown. We'll probably, Marion, have to revisit this towards the end.
We actually need to figure out a way to make this like a stats thing where we actually can compare through like the next month how they do. So let me think on that. And
okay,
and
I think we could like an Excel sheet.
To wrap up. Yeah.
I like it. An Excel sheet that kind of shows what stats they gain through game, and then,
Perfect.
Yeah, we'll have to do the math on that. Give me a few seconds. We'll give you a few seconds to brainstorm.
It might take me a bit, but we've got a month before we probably do this again. So.
Yeah, exactly. We got plenty of time. All right, well, make sure to stick around. We have plenty left to talk about on Game Week. This is Game Week on Sirius XM.
Bringing you up to date on all the action from a busy weekend of women's soccer. This is USL Super League Game Week on Sirius XM FC.
Welcome back into Game Week on Sirius XM alongside Marion Crowder. I'm Anna Witte. We are headed into match week 12 in the Super League. It all starts with Brooklyn against Spokane on Thursday on Halloween, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Peacock. Dallas will host Fort Lauderdale Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Peacock. DC Power against Carolina Sunday at 2 p.m. on Peacock. And then Tampa Bay against Lexington is a Saturday evening match at 7 p.m. on Peacock. This is 2 teams at the bottom of the table. Tampa Bay is coming off 2 losses. They've really made some consistent errors on their back line that have become really costly for them when it comes to giving up goals. But they have this experienced team. And you look at the schedule, Marion, this team has played 8 games. They played 3 matches in the month of October. Oddly enough, 2 matches in the month of September. So continuity is an issue on the field, but they've also had this time to rest. So when you look at Tampa Bay, what do they need to attack mostly in this match against Lexington? Is it trying to be consistent? Is it changing the formation? Or is it all about just scoring goals?
I hope for them it's not being consistent because the last couple times out, we haven't seen very good performances. And really for me, it's been the mentality. We talked about it a little bit earlier, just how the response didn't seem good enough, whether it was the response from the first match of this previous week or whether it was the response from the goal given up to Spokane when there was still plenty of match left to be played. It just all fell flat. So for me, that's a mentality switch. And Anna, you and I talked about it. It's hard to say if something should be a formation swap, if something should be a lineup swap when there aren't that many match reps to go off of. And the reason that I keep bringing this up is because you're right. There is a balance of fatigue, right? Rest and recovery versus match reps. And why I say match reps is because what are you doing when you're not in this kind of consistent match day -1, match day -2 type of mentality? Well, you're getting in quality training sessions, I'm sure,
Yeah.
but the intensity is not going to be the same because you don't want to risk injury to a player mid-season, right? So obviously not people aren't going to go in full on tackles, right? It's going to be different kind of physicality in training. The other thing you're doing is you're watching film. Film is great. Film has its place. Film shows you a lot of different looks. But what film doesn't do is it doesn't prepare you to solve problems in real time. And that's what I think we're seeing the problem with Tampa Bay is they're getting a different look at pressure, right? They're getting a different look at kind of what these formation shifts look like that affect them in the buildup. And because of that, the decision making is just off. But take all of that aside, none of it matters unless there's a better mental response from this Tampa Bay side.
It's going to be a big mental game against Lexington as well, because it's a team who's at the bottom of the table. They've been able to get results of late, but you still look at them at the beginning of the season, like bleeding goals. They've conceded 20 goals. So Tampa Bay has to go into that game knowing that they can get a result with the goal scoring, with the Flo Nielsen in the attack, with Nacello in the attack. But to your point, it's that consistency, and it's also about just making the right next decision on the field, not overthinking it.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're looking at the stats, right, like you wouldn't think anything is wrong with Tampa Bay other than the fact that they're sitting at the bottom of the table, and you go
Right.
and you would say, okay, well, why? There's certainly going to be a stat that shows me why. Well, when we're looking at goals, obviously they're near the bottom of the table. That's not shocking to me because they've also played the least amount of games of anyone. But I would argue that they're not creating maybe quality chances, not enough quality chances, or they're not being efficient enough in front of goal. Well, then you go look at the conversion rate, and they're sitting right at about middle of the pack, tied for fifth. Okay, so nothing too terrible. You go look at their clean sheets, and they are right in the middle of the pack, tied for second at 3. Go look at their goals conceded. They are the lowest amount of goals conceded, second lowest to Carolina Ascent, the team at the top of the table.
Right.
Tampa Bay's only conceded 7. And so I bring all that to say, well, Marion, you're not really making a good argument for yourself. I would argue that I am, because for them, it really hasn't been about all of these statistical categories. Like maybe we're talking about Lexington, where it's just pointing to, all right, we've got to shore up things defensively. It is telling us in the numbers, in the data, that's where you guys are missing, right? It's not in front of goal. But for Tampa Bay, it's not really telling us anything. And so to me, it all comes down to the response that players have on the field. And Anna, to your point, the consistency and the mindset that they choose to show up with on the day. Because the stats are reading just fine. They really should be about the middle of the pack with some of the things that we're seeing from them. It's just not been good enough on the days that matter.
Match week 11 was not good for Tampa Bay, but they get the opportunity to change the tide with this match day 12 matchup against Lexington, who have had a good stride of late. They did drop their last match last week to DC Power. Julie Mackin stepped into the field. She was a player who played an outside back position. That moved Shin a little bit higher up the field in the midfield. And Michael Dickey talked a lot about wanting to get Shin in the midfield, but didn't feel like they could because she provided too much for them stability-wise on the back line. Lexington continues to give up goals, 20 goals on the season. However, they have scored 13. What is the give and take now for Lexington? The next step for them now that they have shown some consistency. They've got some really good players who've shown that they can complete a 90-minute match, but they still got a lot of work to do to climb to the top of the table.
They do. And I hate to be so cliche and so plain and simple, but you have to stop conceding goals. I mean, most goals scored, absolutely, but also the highest goal differential. So while they have the stat, it's not by, and here's what we keep saying, most goals scored. It's 13. It's 13 goals scored. Carolina's right below them at 12, right? So that stat is not some incredibly vast number for us to be like, oh yeah, Lexington's offense is absolutely carrying them through matches, because despite them scoring a lot, right, they're still at the bottom of the table. So it all comes down to their ability to be focused in and around the 18-yard box. How many times have we come in here and said that the marking in the box isn't good enough, right? The pressure on the ball when they get in those red zone areas isn't good enough, or it's those little details that it's really gonna have to take Lexington to the next level, in my opinion.
Lexington still needs to stop conceding, and that's something we've hammered home really since week one in this league. But that's the big storyline for Lexington this fall schedule.
To make our point very clear, the only team right now, they're the only team in USL Super League that does not yet have a clean sheet.
There you go. And that's a great example as to, just to back up that point. You look at a team who can score. They did make changes. Parsons, a player on your five-a-side team, as a player who can get the job done, but they really need that to help them as well on the attacking side of the ball against Tampa Bay. So we still have plenty more to chat about on this show. Spokane's head coach Joe Johnson joins the show. Make sure to stay with us on Game Week on Sirius XM.
Bringing you up to date on all the action from a busy weekend of women's soccer. This is USL Super League Game Week on Sirius XM FC.
Joined by Spokane head coach Joe Johnson. Coach, thanks so much for joining us this week. We're super excited to get to know you a little bit better and obviously what you're doing up in Washington State. This is the first time you've ever coached a professional team. What was your approach to the whole big picture and small picture when it came to soccer, but also being in this brand new environment and brand new league?
Yeah, I think you just heard stories across women's soccer over the past few years with different reports and things coming out about environments. And I think it was very important to just set a standard of high performance and high character. That's a testament and a value throughout the whole organization, top to bottom. And so I wanted to make sure that we did that we had accountability, we could have high performance, that we put a good product on the field. We trained hard, but it was also a positive environment, a growth environment, and a safe environment for the players. And so there was definitely a vetting process of the players that were brought in, staff, everything, that it's high performance and high character. They can both be in the same space. So big picture, that was very important for the staff who we brought in. Just everything we do, it revolves around that. And so big picture, and then just getting into the details. It's hard soccer wise if you go bring that lens in, knowing what to expect with this new league. You've got players coming back from playing overseas. You have players that maybe got some NWSL experience, players coming straight out of college. And so it was a little bit hard to know exactly what you were getting into. You have a game model you want. Right. You have players I didn't necessarily pick, or you don't really know what you need. And then you kind of have to merge and meet in the middle. And so it's kind of been that process last few months on trying to figure out what we need, how we're going to implement it. Now we're starting to see some trends with opponents and stuff. And so there's a little bit of figuring that out, but it's been a fun challenge, the problem solving of it, the flexibility of it. But yeah, just been high character. And then the high performance piece has been big.
That's so well said. Everything that you just put into perspective, just in terms of, things being built right before you even get there. Interestingly enough, for you, in terms of the schedule, you're probably one of the few teams where it's split into two pretty distinct sections, right? So 7 of 8 first matches at home, last 6 in this fall season is what we're calling it, last 6 on the road. I have to imagine when you had a look at the schedule, your mind innately went to breaking this chunk into 2 separate seasons. So I'm interested kind of what you wanted to get, obviously, from the home chunk, and then how you're approaching this next stretch of 6 matches that starts this Thursday on the road to Brooklyn.
Yeah, I mean, the home piece of it was nice just because, again, everything was new. It was kind of hit the ground running. You had 6 weeks of preseason, then you had to train, but it was also very difficult when we didn't have game film on our first 2 opponents. Sure. You didn't, again, know what to expect. You probably hear that a few times from me, but so you felt like, okay, we have home field advantage, but you didn't really have a whole lot of advantage because no one really knew what was going on. And so it was important to get some road points. I think we still dropped a couple. I wish we would have picked up, but so just trying to figure things out as we move forward on the road. We know it's going to be a challenge, but we've, again, brought in those high character people. We knew that we needed to be resilient. We need to get after it. And so I'm actually excited to be on the road, a little bit of team bonding. Yeah. All these players get to see family. We get together. And so I'm actually excited to take on the challenge. And then in the spring, it won't be like this. It's a little bit more balanced, which I appreciate. But yeah, I'm actually it's just one more thing to add to the list. We got our first ever pro, first ever home win, first ever this. And so now going on the road, we just knock that off, and then we can get after it the next 12 months.
You mentioned the fact that being on the road allows the team to come together in moments maybe you can't do it when you're actually at home. Everybody's in their own environments before the match. But outside of that, you guys are the lone team on the West Coast. And these travel days aren't just a 2-hour flight or a 5-hour bus ride. How do you prepare for this type of travel, especially when you're flying from Spokane to Seattle and then across country to JFK for Thursday's match?
Yeah, we definitely want to come in match day -2, and so we can get a little bit acclimated, because like right now it's 9 o'clock, but it's 6 o'clock our time. So
Right.
even when we were at DC, we were eating lunch, but it felt like breakfast. And so it's never easy. The 6-hour long leg from Seattle across to JFK was difficult. And then even having to get our travel plans ahead of time. And then, as we know, again, things are new. Venues changed. Now we don't have training here in town. And so then I think, well, we should have come in later since we got in earlier. But all the things that we'll figure out as we go. And again, back to that problem solving and being resilient. But yeah, it's difficult, but teams had to also make that trek to us. And so we don't want to use that as an excuse, because they've had to do the same thing, just vice versa. So we'll use that as a little bit of motivation for the players that, hey, they came in and gave us their best, and we're going to do the same going back. But it's kind of a little motivation piece for us that we're the lone ones on the other side, and a little bit smaller market, the community. We use that definitely to help, because we feel the community, we feel all of Spokane. We've been in the DC market. This is the first time here in the New York market, but our players are on billboards. They're all over the airport. They know who we are when we walk around. So it's a really cool feeling. And so we might be further away, or we might be in a smaller market, but it doesn't feel that way, because people will stop us. They're in the schools. They're signing autographs all night. Like, it's a really neat environment that the community's brought.
I love that you mentioned that. And I honestly think that we'd be naive, Anna and I, or really anybody that's calling these games, to think that there isn't going to be trial and error for the entirety of this fall season and even into the spring when some more additions start to happen. And one thing, obviously, that is trial and error too is how people adjust to new environments. We were all talking off the top just about how for you, this is more than just a new coaching gig, right? This is moving an entire family. This is getting used to a new community. You've got a third grader, 11-year-old girl, middle schooler that is all adjusting to this with you, mom of 2 young kids. How do you balance it all? I mean, you're obviously balancing so much risk reward. You're talking about it all right now in terms of tactics and approach to the game models. But even as a mom, that's adding just another thing that you got to balance on your plate.
Yeah, I think that's probably a little bit of the reason why it's taken me so long to get into this. My husband's been amazingly supportive, and he was a collegiate strength coach and kind of worked his way up and did his thing and wanted to spend some time with the kids. And we just felt like God opened this opportunity for me to step into a role that I've been developing and coaching in different environments, working on my licensing, doing different things. And we got to a point, he was like, go, you've done the work, you've put in your time. And he was so supportive, and like, I kept trying to find ways to get out of it. I don't know if I can move. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know. And he said, if you say no one more time. And so he really was the one who pushed me, which again gave me that confidence and help knowing. So he's back right now with the kids, being super supportive. And he's a champion for women's in sports. He's a strength coach and getting females into the strength coach profession. And so it's really awesome to see him take on that and kind of champion me, and then see, I can open doors for people in my environment too, and females. And so it's been really awesome. But yeah, it is difficult when your kids are, Mom, I don't want you to go, or missing Halloween. We're playing on Halloween night.
I know.
Pictures and
you're up now. You've got film. You're like up watching film, and they're
yes. But they love it. They're my biggest supporters. The first ones we see off the field. And my son, I tell this story quite a bit, but he was the first one to say, I knew it was going to be tough. We had to have that difficult conversation. And he said, Mom, I'm just happy for you and proud of you. And so I was like, okay, I got to go do this. I got to try. This opportunity doesn't come all the time. And so having the family support with my kids, my husband, my whole family, extended relatives, it's taken a village to get me here. And so I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you to them too, because it's a lot different when you have to go home and cook dinner, and there's just more responsibility as a female to do all those things on top of it. I always talk about going home to my second job. And so
Yeah.
without my family there to help and pick up, I wouldn't be where I am today.
No, we love that. Love to hear a supportive partner and supportive kids. You said that your kids are in 6th and 8th grade, so they're definitely aware of what you're doing, and it's cool to hear that they have the support for you as well.
Yeah, they got their favorite players, and it's fun.
Yeah, I will say in my collegiate days, my strength coach was my favorite coach. So they're just so important and so impactful. Yes. So kudos to him and his career. Really curious, when it comes to the impact of what you're making in Spokane, you mentioned that the players' faces are all over the community is showing up to games. What is the first foundation building block for you when it comes to what you're building in Spokane as a whole?
Yeah, I think just being intentional about doing things the right way. We have a lot of people in our environment that have coached at really high levels, and there's times where it doesn't need to be as difficult or as hard. There's a human element and a holistic element, and so from our performance coaches to our athletic trainers to our marketing, everybody has this vision of, like I said, the high character and high performance. And so putting that out there and living it every day, we've had to have difficult conversations this doesn't match what we're trying to do. It might help something or get an extra goal or whatever, but it doesn't mean that we're going to do it that way. And so being true to that and living that out every day within the details has been big. And then our youth community shows up. I can't tell you how many youth soccer players are out there, and then they see that. And even on the front page of the paper, it talked about a girl seeing Natalie Vigiano getting a yellow card, and she said, "Hey, I get those too. Cool. Like, it's okay." So like the front page of the paper. And so just, again, being champion for women's sports, building what we're doing, trying to do it the right way with the high integrity, making sure that the players are taken care of, that we're, again, not trying to just get to the end just because we can get there faster, throw things up. We're just trying to be really intentional with the processes, the core values, what we're putting out there, because we know it's bigger than us. Players are watching us. They're going to emulate us. We have a platform, and we want to make sure that we're representing female athletes, female coaches in the right way.
We can tell that you're building this super intentionally. So kudos to you and your coaching staff and your players who've had a really nice start to the fall. We've really enjoyed watching. Coach, thanks so much for the time. It was so great to get to know you a little bit better and what you're building in Spokane, and best of luck on Thursday night. Safe travels the rest of the fall schedule as well.
Thank you. Thanks for all you guys are doing as well. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for joining us this week on Game Week. You can join us every single Wednesday on the SiriusXM app, and you can catch all 4 games this weekend on Peacock. For Marion Crowder, I'm Anna Witte. Have a great rest of your week.
You've been listening to USL Super League Game Week on SiriusXM FC.